Before we dive in, remember this is just one chapter of a much bigger story. If you enjoy watching humans stare down the deadliest creatures in the galaxy, stick around for the next parts, share this with a friend, and picture what you'd do in Dan's place. Now let's jump back into the story. The diplomatic quarters were to quiet. Dan Walsh tapped his thumb against his leg, caught himself, and forced his hand flat on his thigh. Outside the wide window, a purple gas giant rolled slowly past, clouds swirling majestically just beyond Meridian Station's hull. It was beautiful, but the silence made his teeth itch. A sky that big should have come with wind and bird calls, not filtered circulation, and a faint hum of machinery. Ela Okoye sat cross-legged on the couch, tablet balanced on one knee as she flicked through files. The xenobiologist's face was composed, but Dan noticed the tension in her shoulders. Ambassador Hiroshi Tanaka had settled into a chair by the window, hands folded, gaze turned outward. He looked serene. Dan knew from experience that serene meant thinking 5 moves ahead and not liking any of them. They'd been on Meridian for 6 hours. 4 of those had vanished into security procedures. Dan used to joke that his career path went forest ranger, predator wrangler, accidental diplomat. For 15 years he'd worked in Earth's parks, talking tourists out of doing suicidal things around large carnivores. He'd faced more than his share of suspicious law enforcement and angry hunters. But Commander Ralvek's interview had still registered as a new personal record in hostility. Your planet is registered as a Class 9 hazard world, the scaled officer had said, claws ticking against the metal desk. And yet you claim to walk among apex predators without armor, venom, or exoskeleton. You claim to survive storms and diseases that would kill most species in hours. You will forgive me if I doubt these legends. Hiroshi had explained, calmly as ever, that Earth really was as bad as the database said. Predators on every continent, weather that went from sunny to lethal in minutes. Parasites, venom, toxins, pathogens. Humanity hadn't muscled its way to survival. It had watched, learned, and adapted. Ralvek's pupils had narrowed. To him, humans were soft, bare skin, blunt nails, a jaw that looked unimpressive next to half the station's residents. Dan had left that room with the distinct impression that the commander wasn't just skeptical, he was offended by the idea that these fragile-looking creatures came from a death world. A soft chime snapped him out of the memory. The ceiling speakers clicked. Counselor Breen's voice spilled into the quarters, his natural staccato whistles and clicks chased by the translator's flat tones. Normally, the insectoid administrator sounded brisk and precise. Now he sounded rushed. Human delegation, please remain calm, the translator said. There has been a security incident. Commander Ralvek has initiated a compatibility test. Do not attempt to leave your quarters or activate any alarm systems. This is for your safety. Ela was on her feet before the message finished. What kind of test? She called toward the ceiling. No reply. Instead, a heavy boom rolled through the corridor outside. Then another. Dan recognized the rhythm of station bulkheads sealing, one after another. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and slapped his palm onto the door control. The panel flashed red, locked, "This is not standard protocol," Hiroshi murmured. The calm was still in his voice, but not in his eyes. Somewhere beyond the wall, something growled. The sound was low and resonant, vibrating through floor and ribs alike. Dan had heard that tone in Montana mountains and Alaskan forests, large carnivores broadcasting a very clear message. Back off. His body reacted before his conscious mind did. His stance shifted, weight centered. His breathing slowed. The door hissed open. Dan moved sideways on instinct, placing himself between the doorway and the others. A shape slipped through the opening on 6 legs, claws clicking faintly on the floor. The creature was about the mass of a big dog, but stretched out and built like a hunting cat. Gray-striped fur hugged a lean frame. Along its spine, crystalline spikes jutted in a jagged ridge, catching the room's lights. A metal muzzle wrapped its snout, cinched so tight he could see raw skin and clotted blood where the straps dug in. Behind the wire mesh, serrated teeth flashed when it snarled yellow. Slit-pupiled eyes swept the room, locked onto the 3 humans. A narrow the door behind it sealed shut with a final, unfriendly hiss. Yuki Soto stepped out from the adjoining bedroom, still in soft station loungewear, a sleep crease on one cheek. She froze for half a heartbeat, dark eyes widening. Then her hand dropped automatically to her medical bag. "Don't move," Dan said quietly, without turning. One wall shifted from opaque to transparent as the smart glass responded to external commands. The corridor beyond appeared like a stage. Faces pressed up against the outside of the windows, scaled, feathered. Chitinous dozens of eyes drinking in the scene. Commander Ralvik stood front and center, arms folded across his broad chest. Counselor Breen hovered near him, agitated limbs clicking, clearly protesting. No one stopped the show. The animal took another step forward. Its growl deepened, vibrating in Dan's chest. The crystalline ridge along its back flared higher, ears flattened under the muzzle straps as it dropped its head in a classic threat posture. "Don't run," Dan repeated, keeping his voice low and steady. The same tone he'd used for years with spooked horses and panicking hikers. Slow movements, hands visible. Nobody scream, nobody bolt. The creature's gaze flicked from Dan to Ela to Hiroshi to Yuki, cataloging them. Its muscles were coiled so tight he expected them to snap. He watched the tremor in its injured back leg, the frantic edge in its eyes, the way its body angled halfway between attack and retreat. Not a sleek, confident hunter on the prowl, cornered, hurt, terrified, fear aggression. His brain supplied, young, expecting pain. Half the station had gathered to watch the soft species panic. Dan lowered his center of gravity a fraction, already planning his next move. As Dan begins to sink slowly toward the floor and meets the juvenile predator's blazing yellow stare, one wrong twitch could turn the room into a massacre or into something the galaxy has never seen. In Part 2, you'll see what happens when a human ranger tries to win the trust of a creature everybody else calls untamable. Dan eased one foot back and sank carefully to one knee, moving like he was lowering himself beside a wounded elk. The creature's gaze snapped to the motion, spikes rising another notch. Its growl climbed in pitch, "It's okay," he murmured. "You're scared. I get it." The words didn't matter. Tone did. Gentle, rhythmic, unthreatening. "Dan, are you sure?" Yuki began. "Talk later," he said without looking back. "Right now we're body language only." Ela shifted slightly to the side, hands spread, keeping her profile turned rather than facing the animal head-on. "Look how thin it is," she whispered. "Ribs visible, fur patchy. That limp isn't new." Dan saw it too. The way the back leg hovered just above the floor. The tight lines of pain around the joints. Someone had pushed this animal far beyond its limits. The creature's breath came in short huffs through the muzzle. It took a stiff step forward, then stopped, torn between fight and flight. "Easy," Dan said. "No one here wants to hurt you." On the other side of the glass, the audience held their collective breath. Ralvek's posture radiated confidence. He fully expected screams, blood, and a frantic call to security. Breen looked horrified. "Yuk, I moved so slowly, it was almost painful to watch." She knelt beside her open med bag, rummaged, and produced a standard issue protein bar. "If it's as undefined as it looks, smell might work in our favor," she murmured. "Let it make the choice," Ela said. "Don't invade its space." Yuki broke off a chunk the size of her thumb and, with deliberate care, rolled it across the smooth floor. It stopped halfway between the humans and the predator. The animal's head snapped toward it. The growl cut off, replaced by fast, shallow breathing. Hunger warred with fear in those yellow eyes. After a long, fraught moment, it limped forward. 6 legs moved in a careful, unsteady pattern. It snapped up the food, and then frustration exploded into a series of muffled snarls. The muzzle prevented it from chewing properly. The scent of calories was so close. It might as well have been on the other side of the atmosphere dome. "It can't eat with that thing on," Yuki said, voice tight. "Which is probably the point." Ela replied, "Chronic pain, constant hunger, a perfect recipe for fear aggression." Dan swallowed a surge of anger that wasn't aimed at the creature. "We're taking it off, Dan," Hiroshi warned quietly. "The observers will assume you're about to get your arm removed. Then let's disappoint them." Dan shifted another inch closer on his knees, careful to keep his movements smooth. "Hey, kid," he said to the creature, because that was what it felt like: young, lost, hurt. "That thing on your face? I know it hurts. I'm going to try to fix that. You get to say no." He extended one hand, palm down, fingers relaxed, stopping well short of actual contact. The predator froze. Every muscle locked. Its eyes burned into his. For a few heartbeats, the only sound in the room was the soft hiss of station ventilation. "See?" Dan whispered. "I'm not rushing you." Behind the glass, someone shook their head. A feather-crested alien covered their eyes. Ralvek's claws dug into his own forearms. The crystalline spines along the animal's back lowered a fraction. "There you go," Dan breathed. He inched forward and let his hand hover near the metal. "Clasp. If you want me to stop, you pull away. Deal." Its nose twitched. Hot breath washed over his skin through the muzzle grill. The creature shook once, a full-body tremor, but did not snap, did not retreat. Dan touched cold metal. "Almost done," he said softly, more to keep himself steady than anything. Just one little catch. The clasp released with a faint click. He eased the muzzle off, careful not to tug on raw flesh. Angry red grooves ringed the animal's snout, where the straps had bitten in. Infection glistened in places. Dan's jaw clenched. The creature's mouth opened and closed experimentally. Free. It licked at the sore skin, then looked up at Dan, expression suddenly, startlingly open. The fear was still there, but something new flickered under it. Curiosity. Relief. Try again, Yuki said gently, rolling another piece of protein bar across the floor. This time the juvenile caught it and chewed properly, eyes half closing as the taste hit. It swallowed fast, then immediately looked for more, small pieces, Ila cautioned. Stomach's probably a mess. Go slow. They fed it bit by bit, always from the floor, letting it close the distance on its own terms. Inch by inch, the curve of its spine relaxed. The spines along its back lowered until they lay almost flat, 2 meters away. Dan settled cross-legged on the floor. You're doing great, he told it softly. See, no screaming, no hitting, no one's chasing you. The animal hesitated, then limped closer and sat down just out of reach, watching him. Its body still blocked the others, as if it had decided he was the most important variable. On the other side of the glass, the crowd had grown thicker. Someone held up a recording device. Breen had stopped waving his limbs and now stared, his mandibles parted in shock. The comm system crackled. Human delegation, Breen said, voice hushed despite the speakers. That animal is a Krin, an apex predator from a world with twice Earth's gravity. Adults have killed representatives of 17 species. No one has ever been this close to one without weapons or barriers. The untamable juvenile in question blinked slowly at Dan, then, to everyone's disbelief, shuffled forward the last few centimeters and carefully leaned its head against his knee. A low rumble vibrated through his leg, not a growl this time, but something almost like a purr. Well, Dan murmured, resting a cautious hand on its shoulder. There's a first time for everything. The Krin's eyes slid closed. Within minutes, the most feared species in known space was asleep, curled up against a human ranger's side, with an apex predator snoring on his knee and half the station in stunned silence. Dan has no idea this test will upend interstellar law, get a commander hold in front of a council, and turn humans into the galaxy's go-to predator experts. In Part 3, you'll see what happens when the truth about the Krin cub band who put it here finally comes out. 2 hours later, the mood in the quarters had changed completely. The Krindan had started calling him Ash in his head. Thanks to the smoky stripes in his fur, lay stretched between Dan and Ela like an oversized, overarmed house cat. Yuki had cleaned the infected cuts, where the muzzle had bitten in, and wrapped the injured leg in a smart bandage. Ash had put up no fight, just watched them with wary golden eyes and the occasional uncertain chirp. He's severely underweight, Yuki reported, checking her scanner. Malnourished, dehydrated, and probably sleep-deprived. Whoever had him before this did not care about his well-being, or actively wanted him desperate. Ela said grimly, desperation makes an animal more dangerous and more predictable. Hiroshi stood near the comm panel, tablet in hand, talking to Counselor Breen. Dan only caught fragments. Unauthorized use of a protected juvenile. Multiple violations of consortium welfare law. Security review. Tribunal. Ash's breathing hitched. Dan's attention snapped back to him. The juvenile's 6 legs twitched, claws flexing as though he were running in a nightmare. Easy, kid, Dan murmured, smoothing a hand along the safer patch of fur on his shoulder. Ash shuddered once, then relaxed, pressing closer. The comm speakers clicked. Breen's voice came through, sounding both furious and deeply embarrassed. This species' Krin juveniles are protected under consortium regulations, he said. They stay with their parents for at least 2 of your years. Taking one is a serious crime. Commander Ralvik acquired this cub illegally and used him in an unauthorized compatibility test. Without notifying station administration, Dan felt his jaw tighten. He used a stolen, injured child to prove we're not tough enough, he said flatly. That about right? There was a pause. Yes, Breen admitted. And I wish I could say such a thing was unimaginable. On the other side of the glass, the crowd had thinned, replaced by a smaller group of higher-ranked officials. Ralvik still stood there, but some of the swagger had gone out of his posture. The door panel flashed green. For the first time since the test began, it opened without revealing teeth and claws. Commander Ralvik stepped inside with 2 security officers at his back. Ash's head snapped up. The spikes along his spine rose, and a low warning growl rolled through the room. Dan didn't move his hand. Hey, he said softly. He's not going to touch you. Ralvik stopped several paces away, staring at the juvenile predator curled up against a human side. I came to admit I was wrong, the commander said. The aggressive edge in his voice was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost shaken. Hiroshi folded his arms. Wrong about what, exactly? He asked, mild as ever. About you, Ralvik said. About humans. About strength. He exhaled, a rough sound. I intended to prove you were weak. That your claims about surviving on a hazard world were lies. I thought the cub would terrify you into begging for rescue. He glanced at Ash. Instead, you removed his muzzle and let the most dangerous species in the consortium sleep in your lap. Yuki snorted softly. Trust me, if we thought he wanted us dead, we wouldn't be sitting on the floor with him. Predators aren't monsters, Ela said. They're animals with needs. You gave him pain and fear. We gave him food and space and a chance. Ralvik's gaze flicked to her. The half measure strength through dominance and force. We believed predators respected only those who beat them into submission. And how's that been working out? Dan asked. Ralvik's mouth twisted. Badly, he admitted. We have lost many soldiers to creatures like this. We never considered the possibility that they were frightened. Ash's growl faded into a soft, uncertain chirp. The spikes along his back lowered halfway. He watched Ralvik with intense focus, but no longer looked ready to launch himself. At the commander's throat. What do you want from us, Commander? Hiroshi asked. I want to learn, Ralvik said simply. I want to understand how you did this. The half can't afford to keep throwing lives at problems that might be solved another way. Dan exchanged a glance with Ela and Yuki. We can teach you, he said, but it means letting go of the idea that every dangerous thing has to be beaten into the ground. Ralvik hesitated, then nodded once. If this, he said, gesturing at Ash, is what it looks like, I'm willing to try. The comm crackled again. Breen sounded different now, no longer just angry, but excited. Human delegation, he said. The Consortium Council has reviewed the footage. They are impressed. They've also noted that there are several ongoing crises across member worlds involving dangerous fauna. Relocation and culling have both failed. They would like to discuss the possibility of humans assisting, consulting on predator problems. Illa's eyes lit up. Across multiple ecosystems? Yes, I'm interested. Dan chuckled softly, still stroking Ash's fur. We came here to see if they'd let us join their club, he said. Now they want us to fix their animal issues. Earth has been a brutal teacher, Hiroshi said dryly. It seems the galaxy just discovered they've been missing a few classes. Ash suddenly climbed fully into Dan's lap, turning in an awkward circle before flopping down with his head on Dan's chest. 40 kilos of sleepy predator pressed into him like a child seeking shelter. I think he's decided your family, Ila said. Smiling, great, Dan muttered, but his hands were already moving to support Ash's weight. What am I supposed to do with a murder fluff that thinks I'm his parent? Love him and keep him safe, Yuki said simply. That's what parents do. The council now knows a stolen Krin cub is curled up in a human's lap, and they're about to uncover who stole him, where he came from, and who's furious about it. In Part 4, Ash's parents arrive at the station, and the galaxy learns what happens. When apex predators discover humans have been caring for their child, 3 days later, Councillor Breen arrived at their quarters practically vibrating, mandibles clicking so fast the translator stumbled. We found them, he blurted through the speakers. Ash's parents. They have been searching for him since his capture. They are on their way here now. Dan's heart did a strange lurch, half joy, half something that felt suspiciously like loss. Over 72 hours, the Krin cub had gone from test animal to responsibility to something like family. Ash rarely let Dan out of his sight, trailing after him with puppy-like devotion and chirping anxiously if he vanished into another room. For too long. When do they get here? Hiroshi asked. 6 hours, Breen replied. There is additional context. Adult Krins stand nearly 3 of your meters tall and weigh over 300 kilograms. They are extremely territorial and exceptionally protective of their young. They do not trust other species. The parents have demanded immediate access to their offspring. They are not calm. Given what was done to Ash, can you blame them? Ila said, we'll explain. They'll see we helped. I hope so, Breen said. But be aware the Krin have every reason to assume the worst. Poachers take their juveniles for the black market. Their crystalline spines are valuable. When these parents arrive, they will be prepared for a fight. Then we show them they don't need one, Dan said, resting a hand on Ash's back. The cub pressed closer, just like we showed their son. The next 6 hours were a blur of preparation. Sections of the station were cleared. Observation decks filled up again. Commander Ralvik, now thoroughly chastened, oversaw security, but in a very different way than before. Instead of just stacking weapons at every entrance, he consulted Ela on Krin body language and stress signals. "The parents will dock here," he said, gesturing to the main base schematic. "We've set up reinforced barriers for observers. Only essential personnel in the open." "I'm going," Dan said immediately. "Ash needs to see someone familiar." "That is extremely risky," Ralvik said. "If they perceive you as a threat, then we make sure they don't," Hiroshi cut in. "We've already established a baseline of communication with their juvenile. That's more than anyone else has ever done." When the Krin ship finally docked, the tension on the station was thick enough to taste. Alarm lights strobed along the docking bay. Behind the reinforced glass, hundreds of aliens watched. Ash stood beside Dan, pressed against his leg, spikes low but eyes bright. The airlock cycled. 3 Krin stepped through. 2 were giants, one slightly larger, with a wider head and heavier shoulders. The other leaner, but just as imposing. Their crystalline spines were fully raised, turning them into living weapons, refracting the bay lights in deadly rainbows. Between them walked an older Krin, grey around the muzzle, movements slower, but no less controlled. Her eyes were sharp and assessing. The parents' eyes locked onto Ash. The cub chirped loudly and tried to bolt forward. Dan's hand tightened gently on his harness. "Wait," he murmured. "Let them come to you. They need to see you're safe first." The larger adult, the mother, Dan Guest released a deep, rolling growl that shuddered through the deck plates. Several spectators flinched. A few outright fled the viewing area. "We mean you no harm," Hiroshi called, projecting his voice across the bay without shouting. "Your child is safe. We've treated his injuries and protected him since we found out what was done." The older Krin stepped ahead of the parents, placing herself between them and the humans. She studied Ash carefully, taking in the clean fur, healed muzzle wounds, and improved weight. Her gaze shifted to Dan, Ela, Yuki, and Hiroshi. "Let the young one go," she said. A collar at her throat translated her words into consortium standard. "If you truly mean no harm, release him." Dan's throat tightened. He unclipped his hand from Ash's harness and gave the cub a gentle nudge. "Go on," he said softly. "Your family's here." Ash hesitated. He looked up at Dan, then at his parents, then back again. "You belong with them," Dan whispered. "Go." The decision seemed to hit all at once. Ash bolted forward, 6 legs eating up the distance. His parents dropped into a protective crouch, surrounding him with massive bodies, touching noses and exchanging a rapid stream of chirps and rumbles that needed no translation. The older Krin watched a moment longer, then approached the humans. "You cared for our young," she said. "The ones who took him did not. They hurt him and used him to frighten others. Yet you healed his wounds and fed him." "Why?" "Because he needed help," Ela answered simply. "We don't abandon frightened children, no matter how many teeth they have. Even when that child could tear you apart?" The elder asked. "Especially then," Dan said. "Predators aren't evil. They're just trying to survive a hostile universe. We understand that. Earth taught us." The mother Krin stepped forward now, towering over them. She lowered her massive head until her eyes were level with Dan's. "You are the one he smells of," she said. "You carry his scent. He carries yours. You were his protector in our absence." "I was the first one he trusted," Dan said quietly. "I did what I could until you could get here." The mother's slit pupils narrowed. Then, slowly, she pressed her forehead against Dan's chest in the same gesture Ash used when seeking comfort. Dan froze, then lifted his hands and rested them gently on either side of her head. Accepting the contact, "You protected my child when I could not," she said. "The Krin do not forget such debts. You have earned my family's friendship." She stepped back to rejoin her mate and son. The elder remained. "I am Greth," she said. "I speak for the Krin homeworld in matters of diplomacy. We heard of humans soft, small, claiming to be death-worlders. We laughed at the idea. We were wrong. You weren't wrong about how we look," Hiroshi said with a faint smile. "We are soft. We break easily. We survive because we learn. This is a skill the galaxy needs," Greth replied. "The Krin will support human admission to the consortium. More than that, we offer alliance. When humans call, we will answer." Behind the glass, the observers erupted into startled conversation. Among them, Commander Ralvik stood motionless, his worldview rearranging itself in real time. Ash trotted back to Dan one last time, pressed his head against the human's chest in a fierce, brief hug, then returned to his parents. The Krin boarded their ship. At the airlock, Greth looked back. "This will not be the last time we meet," she said. "You have changed more than one life today." The airlock sealed. The Krin vessel pulled away into the star-streaked dark, carrying Ash home. Dan watched until the ship vanished, chest tight. "You did the right thing," Yuki murmured beside him. "I know," he said. "Doesn't make it hurt less. Ash is gone. But the ripples of what happened in that docking bay are just starting to spread. The Council meets to decide humanity's fate and the galaxy's most feared predator species shows up to speak on their behalf. For weeks after Ash's departure, Meridian Station looked different to Dan. Not physically, though there were more Krin warning signs around sharp corners now. Different in the way people watched the humans. Where there had been suspicion or amused skepticism, there was now curiosity, even respect. In that month, 12 different species had requested human help with predator problems. Ila had spent long days teaching xenobiologists how to read body language and stress signals. Yuki had adapted veterinary protocols to entirely new anatomies. Dan had found himself standing in mud, snow, and alien swamps on 3 worlds, talking panicked colonists out of shooting everything that moved. Today, though, was bigger than any field consult. The diplomatic chamber was packed. Ships from hundreds of worlds hung outside the station like a drift of strange, glittering seeds. Among them was a Krin vessel. Greth had sent a message. She would attend the vote in person, and she was bringing Ash. "Nervous?" Ila asked, stepping up beside Dan at the tall window. "A little," he admitted. "We came here hoping not to get kicked out on day 1. Now half the consortium thinks we're miracle workers. We're not miracle workers," Hiroshi said. "Joining them. We just grew up on a planet that didn't care if we lived or died. That teaches certain habits. Commander Ralvik entered, formal armor polished to a shine. He'd spent the last weeks shadowing the humans, absorbing every lesson he could about non-lethal approaches. He was still gruff, still prickly, but different. "The council is ready," he said. "They have asked me to testify about the Krin incident." "What are you going to tell them?" Dan asked. "The truth," Ralvik replied. "That I set out to prove you were frauds, and instead proved I did not understand strength at all." They took their places in the circular council chamber. Councillor Breen presided from the central dais, multifaceted eyes reflecting the light from 100 floating displays. "Order," Breen called, his voice echoing through the room. "We gather to vote on humanity's application for full membership in the Galactic Consortium. Before the vote, several witnesses have requested to speak. Commander Ralvik of Hearth Security, you have the floor." Ralvik stepped into the center, looking around at the assembled delegates. "For weeks ago," he began, "I believed humans were weak pretenders. I arranged an illegal test. I released a stolen Krin juvenile into their sealed quarters, expecting them to panic and prove me right." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Everyone knew the basic outline. Hearing it from the architect made it land differently. Instead, Ralvik continued. They approached the terrified predator with food and gentle voices. They removed his painful muscle, treated his injuries, and within hours the most dangerous juvenile in known space was asleep in a human's arms. He glanced toward Dan. "That day, I learned that true strength is not about domination. It is about understanding. The Hearth support human membership. I personally vouch for them." He stepped back. "The floor recognizes Greth of the Krin," Breen said. Greth had to duck slightly to enter, enormous form filling the central space. Several delegates flinched reflexively. Others leaned forward, fascinated. "For 70 of your years, the Krin have been members of this consortium," she said. "In all that time, we have been feared, avoided, constrained. Other species called us monsters and treated us like weapons to be pointed, or problems to be contained. We accepted this, thinking there was no other way for predators." Her gaze sought out the humans. "Then your kind found one of our stolen young. You saw not a beast, but a frightened child. You offered comfort instead of chains. You reunited him with his family. My grandson speaks of you constantly." She turned slowly, addressing the chamber. "The Krin formally ally ourselves with humanity. Where they go, we will stand beside them." One by one, other species offered testimony. The aquatic Quellan spoke of how human consultants had saved colonists by discovering that the attacking monster was just defending its nesting grounds. A feathered Velian delegation described how human methods had resolved predator conflicts on 3 colony worlds without a single cull. Even some who had opposed human membership admitted they had been. Hasty. Finally, Breen lifted his hands for silence. "We will now vote," he said. "Those in favor of granting humanity full membership signal now." Lights flared on consoles and in midair. Dan watched the tally climb, heart pounding. They needed 67%. The numbers jumped past that, kept climbing, stopped at 89. The motion pauses. Breen announced, "Humanity is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Consortium." Welcome to the galactic community. The chamber erupted in a dozen kinds of applause. Hiroshi stepped forward to give the official acceptance speech. He spoke of cooperation, mutual learning, and the strange gift of growing up on a world full of things that could kill you. Dan listened with half an ear. His attention was on the entrance. A familiar gray-striped shape bounded through it, dodging between stunned delegates. Ash had grown taller, heavier, spines sharper, but his eyes were the same. They lit up as soon as he spotted Dan. The Krin cub launched himself across the last few meters. Dan barely had time to brace before 40-plus kilos of enthusiastic predator hit his chest. He staggered, laughed, and wrapped his arms around Ash's shoulders. "Hey, little guy," he said, though little was rapidly becoming inaccurate. "Look at you. You got huge." Ash chirped and nuzzled against him, then yawned wide enough to show an impressive set of teeth. Several delegates flinched. Dan just scratched behind his ears. Ash's mother approached, towering over the little reunion, expression as close to amused as a Krin could look. "He speaks of you often," she said. "The human who made him feel safe when everyone else made him afraid. You are part of his pack now, whether you like it or not." "I'm honored," Dan said honestly. Ash circled once and, with perfect disregard for protocol, settled in Dan's arms and promptly fell asleep. The chamber slowly quieted. Hundreds of beings watched a soft-skinned human cradle a predator. That had once been a myth of terror. Greth's voice rang out. "This is what humanity brings," she said. "Not bigger guns or stronger armor, but the ability to see past fear to the living being beneath. They will change this galaxy." Counselor Breen approached the human delegation. "Ambassador Tanaka," he said, "the Council has another request. We wish to establish a department dedicated to interspecies relations and predator behavior. We would like humans to lead it." "We accept," Hiroshi said without hesitation. "But we'll need more experts from Earth, for people aren't enough to cover a galaxy." "The galaxy waited this long for someone who understands predators," Breen replied. "We can wait a little longer." Yuki was already buried in planning on her tablet. Ayla was deep in discussion with xenobiologists. Ralvik stood nearby, posture respectful. "I owe you an apology," the commander told Dan. "My test could have killed you. I acted out of arrogance and prejudice." "You also learned from it," Dan said. "Most people don't get that far." "That matters. Will you keep teaching me?" Ralvik asked. "I want my people to stop treating everything dangerous as an enemy." "Sure," Dan said. "But it'll take time. You have a lot of bad habits to unlearn." "I have time," Ralvik replied gravely. Ash stirred in Dan's arms, making small, contented sounds. His crystalline spines lay completely flat. He was, for the moment, the very picture of a safe, loved creature. The ceremony went on around them, votes recorded, alliances formalized. Speeches given, but Dan's world had narrowed to the weight of the sleeping Krin, and the warmth against his chest. This, he thought, was why humans had come to the stars, not to conquer, but to connect, to find common ground with beings who looked nothing like them. Earth had been a harsh teacher, but it had taught humanity to listen, adapt, and care. Ash's eyes opened briefly. He looked up at Dan, chirped once a soft, content sound, and tucked his head back under Dan's chin, tail curling around his arm. "Welcome home," Dan whispered. He wasn't sure whether he meant the station, the consortium, or this strange new role in the galaxy. Maybe it didn't matter. Outside the chamber windows, ships from 1,000 worlds drifted in celebration. Inside, a human held a predator with unflinching tenderness. Somewhere, in that simple, quiet moment, the galaxy's idea of danger shifted. Humans came to prove they belonged. Instead, they taught the galaxy that the strongest thing in a hostile universe isn't claws, fangs, or armor. It's the choice to care anyway. If you'd like more stories in this universe, new predators, new worlds, and new impossible bonds, we can build the next saga together.